And I think I want to go ahead and get started with the press freedom story. So, if you are not aware, yesterday was World Press Freedom Day, advocating for free press and protecting free press. But it was such an interesting day because with all of the political officials that spoke about World Press Day, they seem to forget one person in particular, but not everyone. Now, Barack Obama was one of those people who actually decided to say something about World Press Freedom Day. Ironic, I know. And this is not an Alanis Morissette video, but it will give you Alanis vibes. So Barack Obama tweeted this out of himself, giving a response here in reference to World Press Freedom Day. So he said that journalists have always been on the front lines of the struggle for democracy. That is why we need to keep standing up for the rights of journalists around the world. Grateful that we have Columbia journalists and people like Jelani Cobb taking on this important work. So I want to show you something here before I play this clip. Notice that he mentions again democracy. They continue to regurgitate this talking point that it's all about protecting our democracy. But I told you what they really mean by that. They really mean making sure that you can vote for people who are running in the Democratic Party and that the Democratic Party can pull out as many voters as possible. That is really what that is about when they use this phrase. And he goes on to say that we have to protect and keep standing up for the rights of journalists around the world. But when has that happened? And what does that mean in reference to someone like Julian Assange? This is the hypocrisy that comes along with people like Barack Obama, people like Anthony Blinken. We'll get into that in a second as well. Having the audacity to give speeches about World Press Freedom Day and the importance of having press freedom and leaving out one person in particular who obviously has had that freedom removed and is in prison because of it. So let's get into this video of Obama's speech here. By the way, notice it says the Obama Foundation. Okay. People kill me with these foundations.
This event.
They kill me with these foundations because you don't really know where this money is going to. In my opinion, you don't. This World Press Freedom Day takes a look at Barack Obama's remarks at the Columbia Journalists Fault Lines Democracy Conference and why the free press is vital for democracy to survive and thrive. See, that's what it's all about for them. That's why they're advocating for free press, to protect democracy. That's it. Listen to this.
Hi, everybody. I want to start by thanking Columbia Journalism School for organizing this event, and I want to give a special shout out to your dean, Jelani Cobb, without whom we wouldn't be here today. Dean Cobb has never been afraid to tackle tough issues. So last summer, I reached out to him to talk about the role of the press in strengthening our democracy. What I didn't expect was that less than a year later, he would organize a series of events to explore the issues and debate solutions.
Now, before we go on, you have to remember that Barack Obama went to Columbia University. So this is another example of someone who is a former politician, but also politicians do this too. They still have their hands in academia, in higher ed in some way, shape, or form. It's not just Columbia, Harvard, MIT, Yale, Stanford. These elite academic institutions continue to hold on to these politicians, these people that graduated from their universities and went on to take a foothold in government in some way, shape, or form. So this is not unusual. But you have to remember that even Columbia University is going to protect the State Department talking points. This is why they'll have someone like Obama continue to come back, not just because he was president, but because there is a connection there. And I explained this to you guys. Chris Hedges and I were talking about this, how it's not just the press that repeat State Department talking points, but it's also the universities. These universities that a lot of people think are like these liberal enclaves, so to speak. They're not. They're businesses. And many of them, when you look at the business side of things, they're actually more conservative than they are liberal. So much for the days of college being about free speech and free thought. Let's go on.
That's exactly what he did. And I'm grateful to everyone who's participating, including some of the brightest minds in media and academia who are actively working through these challenges every single day.
And actively working through it together. The media and higher ed, they're all working through it together.
I talk a lot about how democracy is neither inevitable nor self-executing. Citizens like us have to nurture it. We have to tend to it and fight for it. And as our circumstances change, we have to be willing to look at ourselves critically and make reforms that can allow democracy not just to survive, but to thrive. That's especially important right now.
What do universities have to do with this? You know, the Democratic Party has its foothold in many institutions. JB and I talked about this earlier. One of them is the church, the Black church in particular. The Democratic Party has a foothold in the Black church. I think those two things should be separate, but what do I know? I'm not a preacher. But they tend to have their feet in different places. They have a foothold in academia now, as you can see as well. So here is Columbia University going along with the State Department talking points for the Democratic Party about how important it is to protect our democracy, which I argue we don't really have, because if we had democracy, would we be arguing right now about whether or not progressive candidates can debate with Joe Biden? No, we wouldn't if we had democracy. If we had democracy, third party and independent candidates wouldn't have to fight to the death to get on the ballot in every state in this country if we really had democracy. But what this is a play to get the universities to energize the students to continue to come out and support the Democratic Party. And mark my words, they will be very much involved when it comes to 2024. They will be very much involved in getting those students to come back out and support Joe Biden, just like the students did in the midterms. That's what this is all about. Every time you see Obama pop back up in the spotlight, it's usually because something is at risk in reference to a Democrat candidate or a Democrat race. And this is no different.
Our democracy has always faced its share of challenges, but increasingly it feels like we're at an inflection point with rising inequality, deepening polarization, and widespread disinformation. At the same time, we're also trying to adapt to advancements in technology like AI that could profoundly change our world. If we want to preserve our democratic ideals, we need to face these trends head on, and we need all of you to help us do it. Journalists have always been on the front lines of the struggle for democracy, and some of you have the scars to prove it. And that's why it's so important to find creative ways to reinvigorate quality journalism. It's why we need to keep standing up for the rights of journalists around the world.
Really? Does that include people like Julian Assange? Does that include people like Daniel Hale? You see, this is the elephant in the room. And a lot of people talked about it yesterday on social media. They were like, how in the world can all these people come out and defend press freedom? And they won't even mention Julian Assange's name. Won't even utter his name. So if we're really about protecting journalists all over the world, then that would also include Julian Assange, who's in Belmarsh, correct? Wouldn't that include him? If Obama really wanted to, if he believed that and they really wanted to protect him, they would have let him go. They would have called for the release of Julian Assange. Let me tell you who they're really talking about. They're not talking about the journalists that you and I would think of. They're talking about the journalists that meet the requirements and the needs of the State Department. They're talking about the so-called journalists at CNN, although they're not journalists, they're commentators here. They're talking about them. They're talking about the ones at MSNBC. They're talking about the Washington Post. They're talking about the New York Times. They're talking about the Wall Street Journal. They're talking about the mainstream publications that have already gotten that stamp of approval from the State Department. They are not talking about independent journalists. They're not talking about independent investigative journalists. They're talking about the people that they approve of and who they consider to be journalists. Everybody else to them, they consider these to be fringe people. That's important for people to understand. They're not referring to the independent journalist.
Many who are facing increasing threats and challenges, just trying to do their jobs. So what does all this mean for us? As a private citizen, although one that can still get a fair amount of attention, I plan to keep shining a light on the biggest challenges that democracy faces.
That means he plans to keep making appearances to make sure that Joe Biden will win again in 2024. I'm going to be his interpreter today. I'm going to tell you what he's really saying that he's not going to come out loud and say, you know?
That includes revitalizing our political institutions, coming up with more inclusive and sustainable models of capitalism, and creating a stronger democratic culture.
That does not make any sense. This piece right here. Watch this. Watch this.
Can still get a fair amount of attention. I plan to keep shining a light on the biggest challenges that democracy faces. That includes revitalizing our political institutions, coming up with more inclusive and sustainable models of capitalism. And
did you catch that last part? Coming up with more inclusive, sustainable models of capitalism. It's not sustainable. He knows that. He's not going to be able to say that. What does that have to do with democracy? Revitalizing our political system? How so? What are you going to implement? Does that mean making things more fair for independent and third-party candidates? No, he's not talking about that. But sustainable and inclusive forms of capitalism? What does that even mean? There's no way. No way. Look, 9 times out of 10, if you're born poor, you die poor. 9 times out of 10. That doesn't mean that you can't get out of poverty. You can, but it is very difficult to do so. And it is a cycle. And I've seen people go through it. My parents went through it. They were able to find a way out. Unfortunately, that way was joining the military. I did not recommend that. I don't think they would recommend that right now. But what do you mean? Inclusive and sustainable capitalism.
Creating a stronger democratic culture, but it also means creating an information environment that reinforces rather than erodes our democracy.
That means when he says reinforces the democracy, what he's talking about is journalism that supports and backs the Democratic Party and the establishment piece of the Democratic Party. That means journalists who smear RFK Jr. or Marianne Williamson, those people he's not going to be concerned with. They will be concerned with the people who try to smear Joe Biden. That's what this really means. He wants to keep the status quo in place. That's what that's really about. And they know that mainstream media, their ratings are decreasing. They know that CNN is losing ratings. They're losing viewers. They know MSNBC is losing viewers. And after Fox got rid of Tucker Carlson, they know Fox is losing viewers. And more people are starting to turn to independent media. So be very careful, guys. I'm telling you, I'm warning you now, going into 2024, 2024 is going to be wild. Don't be surprised if they start to come after people in independent media that are not in favor of Joe Biden's candidacy. Do not be surprised at that.
One in which truth matters. One in which we are able to distinguish between fact and opinion.
Told you. What did I tell you? What did I tell you? So if truth matters, then you should free Julian Assange. If truth matters, then Julian Assange should be released because what Julian Assange revealed was truth. You may not have liked what was revealed, but it was true. So he should not be in prison. Fact versus opinion. Does that mean CNN is going to be removed? Does that mean that CNN will no longer exist? Because let's be real here, 24-hour news, and they're correct half the time, maybe half the time. Does that count as opinion? When you have commentators and they're not journalists, remember they argued this, they're not journalists, they're commentators. Technically, is that opinion? They'll get to stay though because they're mainstream.
One in which we're able to tell a common story and not just a bunch of separate stories that reinforce our biases and our prejudices.
One that we will be able to repeat the narrative from the State Department and not one that goes against it.
These are areas where we're going to have to do better for our democracy to stay strong. And you are going to be on the front lines of making that happen.
Who? Are you guys going to be on the front line of doing this? Are you guys going to be on the front line of making sure that people are telling you facts and not opinions? And you guys going to be on that battlefield for Obama? What does he mean by us?
I want to challenge all of you to think about how you can make a difference, both individually and collectively, to the cause, not of any particular politics or political party, but to the cause of facts.
That means I want to let all of you guys know that I encourage you to start reporting people that are not using the same narrative as the State Department. You know, you just gotta see through the bullshit. Like you really do. You gotta see past this.
And accuracy and truth and credibility. And that includes all of you who are students. You're going to be shaping the future of journalism and the media.
What I tell you, I told you they're going to be coming after the students.
And there are going to be times where business models and technologies are making it tougher for you to do your job. There are going to be moments in which it feels like the only way to get attention is to try to engage in the sort of opinion journalism that gets people angry and right.
He's talking about the independent media. You guys may be tempted to start your own YouTube show. You guys may be tempted to start a blog. And what I want you to know is that you need to study when you're studying journalism here at Columbia. Make sure you're going to the right outlets to do your job. The ones that tell fact and not fiction. The ones that, again, repeat the narrative from the State Department. That's what this is. This is what he's really trying to tell people, you guys. Not the ones that feed into your bias. This is what he's talking about.
Riled up and resentful, or just creates controversy and
Hold up. Let's go back a little bit. I'm sorry. This is too funny to me.
Moments in which it feels like the only way to get attention is to try to engage in the sort of opinion journalism that gets people angry and riled up and resentful, or just creates controversy and gets attention.
Don't report information that will upset people. Don't report information that will do that. That's what he's saying. You know, similar to like Seymour Hersh's article about the Nord Stream pipeline. Don't do that, guys. That'll get you attention and it riles people up. That's what Obama's telling you.
And hot takes and clickbait.
What I tell you.
The problem is if that's all we're doing, then it's going to be harder and harder for us to determine and distinguish between truth and fiction.
Guys, in so many ways, he is calling out independent media without saying those words, without saying independent media. This is what he is doing. I told you guys, like they are starting to see, wait a minute. Too much information is coming out of these guys. They're starting to see it. They had to pull Obama from Martha's Vineyard to get him to talk about it. Now, again, this is in reference to World Press Freedom Day. And he's basically using code words here to basically tell you, don't do independent media. Don't listen to independent media. It's clickbait and it's for hot takes. It riles people up.
It's going to be harder for us to be able to have reasonable debates in the marketplace of ideas. It's going to be a lot easier for those who want to polarize us. And
how are you going to have debates when the DNC right now don't even want to have any debates? So how are you going to debate?
break us apart. And it's going to be more difficult for us to self-govern. So what you do next, the imagination, the innovation, the determination that you're able to apply in your jobs is going to help determine the fate of our democracy.
It's all your fault, guys. Young people, Gen Z, those of you listening, it's all on you. You got to stop this madness. And if you don't do it, well, then our democracy will just fall apart. You don't want that to happen, do you? This is pathetic. This is absolutely pathetic. Notice how calm he is when he's saying this. He's all chill and stuff, you know, making it seem like, but if you actually listen to what he is saying, he is basically trying to find a way to turn people off from alternative voices. This is what Obama is trying to do.
Whether democracy gets stronger or whether it gets weaker, whether people become more divided or can come together to solve some of our biggest problems.
Better get along and go along with everybody in the party, guys. This whole progressive side or wing of the Democratic Party, you got to just, you know, compromise and go along with the status quo. Otherwise, you're just dividing people. That's what he's telling you.
Events like this are a great start, a way for us to begin to get some frameworks around these issues and hopefully come up with some solutions. And I'm really looking forward to following your progress. But I hope you understand how important the work.
Catch that last part. Catch that last part.
This are a great start, a way for us to begin to get some frameworks around these issues and hopefully come up with some solutions. And I'm really looking forward to following your progress.
He's looking forward to following your progress. In other words, I'm really looking forward to the U.S. government and these alphabet letter agencies finding ways to track you guys more so on Twitter, also on Discord, also Substack. We will be watching you, boo. In other words, they're going to watch you. Tracking your progress. Tracking you, following you.
But I hope you understand how important the work that you do is and why it's going to matter to all of us. Let's get to work.
Bruh, I can't. That one is tough. That one's really tough. Hit that like button, guys, if you haven't had a chance to do so. But I had to interpret that because that video actually got a lot of likes. And I'm like, do people even really understand what Barack Obama is saying in this video? What he's telling people to do? Now, World Press Freedom Day. Again, Julian Assange was the elephant in the room until a reporter decided to bring up that elephant. Now, Karine Jean-Pierre, she was questioned about Julian Assange and Biden's hypocritical comments about press freedom. Listen to this. It is the elephant in the room. And by the way, kudos to the journalist who asked this question. Kudos to you.
One more press freedom question. Advocates on Twitter today have been talking a great deal about how the United States is engaged in hypocrisy by talking about how Evan Gershkovich is held in Russia on espionage charges, but the United States has Espionage Act charges pending against Julian Assange. You respond to that criticism?
Say, what is the criticism?
Well, the criticism is that the argument is that Julian Assange is a journalist who engaged in the publication of government documents the United States is accusing him of crime under the Espionage Act, and that therefore the United States is losing the moral high ground when it comes to the question of whether a reporter engages in espionage as a function of his work. So can you respond to that?
So he brought up the fact that Julian Assange is in prison. He's being, they're trying to charge him with the Espionage Act. He's a journalist. A journalist has never been charged with that before. And so he brought up the elephant in the room. How can you guys all speak about World Press Freedom Day and not even mention Julian Assange? Or you're not trying to do anything to make sure that Julian Assange should be freed? Listen to her response.
Look, I'm not going to speak to Julian Assange in that case from here. What I will say is, and you heard directly from the president when today in his statement on this anniversary, but also during the dinner where he talked about the freedom of the press and how important it is to protect journalists, because it is part of our democracy, right? It is important to have that if we want to have a democracy.
See, again, notice I told you they all got the memo. It's part of our democracy. Protecting the press. We have to protect our democracy. They all got the memo. These are the the standard PR talking points. She doesn't want to comment about Julian Assange. Why not?
Democracy, right? It is part of how we move forward. Telling the facts, being able to tell the truth, and be able to reporters to do that freely. And
being able to tell the truth and for reporters to do that freely. That's exactly what Julian Assange did. He told the truth. You just didn't like the truth that he told. It's so hypocritical. You cannot trust these people. There's no way you can sit here and tell me that you trust them. Really?
So the president's going to continue to speak to that. The president's going to continue to work to make sure that these Americans who are, again, held hostage, who are wrongfully detained, come home. And that is something that...
Is he? So the president is going to make sure that Julian Assange gets to come home? I don't think so. Merrick Garland doesn't feel that way. No one else wants to talk about it. So which journalist is she referring to? Because she just told you she doesn't want to talk about Julian Assange, but then she goes on to say the president's going to make sure that those journalists, are freed, the ones that da-da-da. But who is he who?
And so the president's going to continue to speak to that. The president's going to continue to work to make sure that these Americans who are, again, held hostage, who are wrongfully detained, come home. And that is something that we have seen under this administration. He's been able to do more than a dozen times. And so you see this president's commitment in just this last 2 years. We've put forward additional tools to do that, to deal with this matter. And so that's what I can speak to. That's what I can speak to the president's.
You put forth additional tools to bring home the people that protect the State Department. You did that for those people, not for the journalists that do not parrot those State Department talking points. You see, you have to play their game. And if you don't play the game that they want you to play it, they will let you sit there and rot. There's no rush here. There's no rush here for them to try to make sure that Julian Assange can go home and be with his family. They don't care. If there was a sense of urgency, it would have been done already. But no. Talk about press freedom. Now she finishes here and she says it one more time. She lets you know she's not going to talk about it.
Additional tools to do that, to deal with this matter. And so that's what I can speak to. That's what I can speak to the president's commitment on this. I'm not going to weigh in on comments about Julian Assange. Go ahead.
Told you. Elephant in the room. They don't want to talk about Julian Assange. On World Press Freedom Day, Darth Vader says Julian Assange is not even an American citizen. Does not matter. It's the United States government that has the power to release him. All we need is for Merrick Garland to drop the charges. That's it. And he's released. That power lies in his hands. If Julian Assange, if they bring him to the United States, that's a wrap. That is a wrap for him. And if that's a wrap for him, that's a wrap for other people who are independent journalists as well. Because if they actually get him on something like this, what does that mean for everybody else? People think this isn't a big deal. This is a huge deal. A journalist has never been charged with an espionage act. This is crazy. Now, someone did decide to speak about it. And I want to give a shout out to Medea Benjamin from Code Pink, because she was not having that. Now, it says here, Defend Assange campaign on World Press Freedom Day. Code Pink demonstrators invade the stage to confront Anthony Blinken over the continued persecution of Julian Assange for basic journalistic practices. On this day, it is impossible not to call for the release of Julian Assange. So they're just sitting here, you know, just shooting the breeze, and they get a surprise visitor.
In particular, I'm curious whether you've been able to talk.
Excuse us, we can't use this day without calling for the freedom of Julian Assange. The Biden
Yep.
the extradition request for Julian Assange.
2 hours and not one word.
Take it easy. Take it easy. Take it easy, guys.
Not one word about journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, who was murdered by the Israeli occupation forces in Palestine. One word about Julian
We're here to celebrate freedom of expression, and we just experienced it. Let me continue, Mr. Secretary, to ask you about Evan Gershkovich and your efforts to get him free. Well, first, in particular, I'm curious whether you've.
These people are so fake. They're such frauds. They're such frauds. Look at how they drag her away. Watch this.
Been able to talk.
Excuse us, we can't use this day without calling for the freedom of Julian Assange. The Biden.
Now, you see one guy has her over here. This is a rather large gentleman, right? Maybe like a bodyguard type. Now, please explain to me why that one man can't remove Medea Benjamin. Look at this. There he look at this.
The extradition request for Julian Assange.
Look at how tiny. Medea Benjamin, I've met her in person. She's tiny. Why do you need 3 men to remove Medea Benjamin? Right? And then they just, again, 2023 World Press Freedom Index. And they just continue on having the conversation. But it is the elephant in the room, and people need to bring it up. It is honestly embarrassing to see Anthony Blinken sit there and talk about, oh, yeah, let's talk about political prisoners. Let's bring these journalists home. And you are sitting there pretending like Julian Assange doesn't even exist. And more people are waking up to it. More people are learning more and more about Julian Assange's case. So it's embarrassing and it's hypocritical. Now, Medea went on afterwards because there was actually a funeral procession for press freedom. This is coming from Ford Fisher, so he was there to cover the event. It says there was a funeral procession for press freedom, then marched to the office of the Washington Post, where they placed caskets in front of the entrance. Let's listen to this. So Medea comes out here as well. What do you? And I'm familiar with some of these people. There's Julie. I'm familiar with them. This is the Women's Institute for Freedom of Press. They gave me an award. They're like awesome organization, you guys. But they're always at these events.
What are you gonna do? Very appropriate to lay it here.
Is that Suzanne? I think that's Suzanne.
That sounds like.
Did you make it?
And this is exactly where you should take it, to the press. Take it to the press. Oftentimes we've had protests where we protest police brutality. We protest Medicare for all. And I brought this up before about a year ago. We need to start protesting at these news organizations. We need to protest at the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, NBC, MSNBC. We need to be Fox News. We need to protest at all of these because the media, they're the most dangerous threat because they control the narrative. Just something to think about in the future.
Is anybody?
Freedom for Assange! Freedom for Assange! Freedom for Assange! Freedom for Assange! Turn it into a song. Freedom for Assange!
I'm going to introduce our next speaker, actually vocalist, DC's favorite.
And I want to pause it there. I wanted to get to the part where Medea comes up. Or maybe he just got the song. I thought there was a part where she came up towards the end, but they sang a song there. I can't really play. I gotta be careful with the music. But yeah, World Press Freedom Day. Like you can't ignore the elephant in the room. Not anymore. So we got to push back on that, guys. Go to some of the comments here. Whoever, a free press is based on the First Amendment, and we're all supposed to have free speech. It's not just about the press. Well said. Roger Meadows says, Jelani Cobb, I used to like when I watched the Melissa Harris Perry show back in my MSNBC days. That was until he put his hand on Jose the other day, last week, for challenging the editors of the New York Times and the Washington Post. That's right. That was the same guy. The guy who tried to take down Jose. You guys remember we talked about that. Dana says the establishment is realizing they are losing control of the narrative. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the super chat, MMT Chaparrito. What democracy? As if they actually believe in the marketplace of ideas. Right? Thank you for the super chat, Frank. He just looks evil now, like Bill Clinton. Mm-hmm. Thank you for the super chat, Jay Sharp. I was wondering when were going to pull him out from under a rock. You know, every time they bring him back, you know what's up. Thank you for the super chat, MMT again. BTW. By the way, Anthony Blinken is with West Exec Advisors. These were the advisors that Kim Iverson brought up during the recent interview. Yeah, all these people are connected. All of them. Shout out to JB. Says, hi, everyone. Like the stream. Yes, guys, give me a thumbs up. I'll take that comment on Rockfin and then we'll go on to the next story. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Obama used the Patriot Act to attack the media by allowing the federal government to seize phone records, email records of the New York Times reporter, and having a mass data collection of credit card, bank accounts, and emails and other media outlets' phone numbers and emails to find out who they might have been calling in order to find out who the whistleblowers were in the government. He also banned the press from major events. There you go. But Obama says press freedom is important.